The last 12 years of my work life was as a high school teacher at Brackenridge High School, which is in the San Antonio Independent School District.
And when did you start writing, and just like how? And just tell me a little bit about how you were writing and stuff like that.
Okay. Actually, I started writing more than 30 years ago. I was in my early 30s, I mean 40s, when I finally sat down and wrote a memory that I had of my grandmother, Teresa. I was named after her. And I decided that I was going to sit down and write that memory. Interesting, I thought I was just going to sit down and journalize um, like you do on a diary. But when the story came out, it came out as an actual story. I didn't think much about it back then, but now when I reflect on that, I feel that that was just part of a larger plan. And the reason I started writing was because my mother died when I was 6 months old. And there were so many gaps in my life about that I wanted to know about her, like her favorite color. And I would think, is it yellow? Because mine is yellow. Or I wonder how mom and dad met. And there were so many questions that I could not find the answer to. And so I decided that I was going to write about the way I had been raised, the people that raised me, and why they raised us. I wanted to fill in gaps that they might have after I'm gone and there's nobody to ask. And that was my principal reason for writing. I didn't have a vision of, well, someday I'm going to publish a book. That was never in the back of my mind.
That makes sense. And so it's my understanding that a UTSA professor found it because you posted it on Facebook. And so I love that your intentions were not to publish it, but here we are, and we're very thankful for it. But could you mind telling me the professor's name and how just real briefly, like how that even came to be?
Okay. 4 years ago, I lost my husband. And about a year later, I went ahead and I took all my writings out that I had written over a long period of time. And I was kind of surprised that I had written so much because I kind of lost track of that sometimes. And then the pandemic hit, and I was just shut in here at home. I couldn't even see my own children or grandchildren. And of course, I was bored to tears. And one day I thought, I'm going to go ahead and post a few of my stories on Facebook. Maybe people out there will enjoy them. And I got such a positive response. People just telling me how the stories brought up their own memories of their childhood on the West Side, that I should publish. So many people kept telling me, you need to publish these, you need to publish these. And of course, I wasn't going to do it. And I didn't know that Josie Mendez Negrete was reading some of my stories. And so one day she called and she said, Teresa, I want you to stop putting your stories out on Facebook. Somebody is going to take them. And so we kept on talking, and then I found out that she had a publishing company here in San Antonio, and the name of it is Conocimientos Press. And so she and I started talking about publishing a book of my stories, and that's how it all happened. I would have never thought that a pandemic and a platform called Facebook was gonna somehow merge to make this happen.
I I I think we kind of talked about this on the phone, but like it's important to kind of like share these stories, but also like I told you, like even to get my grandparents to talk about these things, it's for whatever reason it's hard to, and you didn't even want to like share them really, like it wasn't. So tell me why I guess it's important to share these stories, even though we often think that, you know, maybe nobody will care or maybe it's not that important? Like, why is it still important to share these stories?
Well, I think our stories have not been told. And I read a lot. I have been a reader since I was 5 years old. And I rarely read anything that reflected who I was and the life that I grew up in. And so I'm really excited to see so many young people starting to write and put out books, people that talk about our culture or talk about our names, you know, Spanish names. But I really believe that we all should find out where our roots are, because those roots are going to almost define how we feel about ourselves. And they're also going to provide us with some of the tools that we need to get through hard times. Because if you go back and you start looking at your family roots, you find out that our families are very strong families, hardworking families, decent folks, resilient, who in the face of much suffering and struggle, we've been able to survive, and not only just survive, but survive with joy. And I think that especially our youth, to me, I can tell you after teaching for 12 years, our youth are pretty lost. And they have they're not grounded. They don't really know who they are or where they come from. And I think that's so critical to know and to rejoice over. And I think I was just very fortunate in the fact that we always maintained very close ties to our family in Mexico. And we went back and forth. And I spent so many of my summers out there with tias and primos and primas. And I loved it. I loved it because they were so rooted in their own, in the culture. And luckily, my grandmother, when she came over, brought all that culture with us. And she made sure that she was passing that down to us. And I have tried to pass some of our culture down to my own children. And that's what I'm hoping that maybe the book will do, that it will excite people to embrace their culture, to reconnect with it, to start thinking about some of those beautiful traditions and rituals that they can incorporate into their own life and pass on to their kids, and let that be a part of their legacy. Just like I believe that part of my legacy to my children is so much is our culture.
So let's talk about some of those traditions and rituals. I like that you call it rituals because it really is like a process that when you start it together, at the end of it, you feel better. Or you've had a moment, or you've created some kind
Right.
of memory. I have a couple just that we spoke about on the phone. So one of them was the when you make the
Tamalada.
Yes, when you make the tamales together, and I think that a lot of people still do that now. But also sometimes we wait like outside somebody's house for hours because we want to buy some instead of making our own, perhaps. And so, tell me a little bit about that experience and why you think that process is important.
It's that one time of the year that in my family we invite everyone, and people come and go throughout the day while the tamales are being assembled, while all that work is being done. It is very labor intensive, but before you know it, it's done. We've had a wonderful time together, gossiping con los chismes, remembering, our antepasados, and just talking about everyday life. And people's lives are so busy now, so that it is that one time that we all get together, everybody looks forward to participating, and we put the little ones to work, the teenagers, you know, my children, that generation. My generation is pretty much now supervising. Just like at one time, my mom, and then before that, my grandmother would supervise us. And they're really the ones that get on the phone and start talking about, when is our tamalada? Have they picked a date? And it's an exciting time for us. And we've been able to share that with my son-in-law and my daughter-in-law that are not Mexican American, and hopefully they have embraced that. And it's important because that's a very dear tradition that has been going on for centuries. I can remember probably when I was 5, that's probably my first recollection of a tamalada that we had at my house. But back then, my grandmother and my mother would make the tamales on the 24th. And then by the time that we would go to midnight mass and come back, the tamales were ready and we would, start eating them. We don't do that anymore. We usually do it like 3 weeks before Christmas. We cook a few that day, and then we freeze the rest, and then we cook them on the 24th.
When you said midnight mass, I remember like being a kid and going to midnight mass, and I was like, Santa's gonna come, and I'm not asleep, and like I'm at church right now. Oh my goodness. I want to talk a little bit about the limpia. So like, it's not just cleaning the house out; it's a lot more than that. So
right, which is, and we did that too in the spring. We would have our big spring cleaning, and this is what I call a ritual, not a tradition. In my mind, they're different. Going back, my grandmother, who raised me and finished raising my older siblings after our mother died, was a woman of faith. I shared a small bedroom with her. She had a twin bed, I had one. And I never left that room until she passed away, even though I could have, but I didn't want to leave her. The very first thing that would wake me up in the morning was the murmuring of her prayers as she knelt before her little altar. And then I would fall back to sleep, and then I would wake up again to the sound of her palote, rolling out a stack of tortillas for our breakfast and our lunches. And the very last thing that I heard before I fell asleep again was the murmuring of her prayers, again, kneeling before her altar. She had an assortment of santitos, and she had a relationship with each one. She would move them around, I think, depending on, had they answered her prayers. Sometimes I would walk in and St. Anthony would be facing the wall. And I figured that, he's not in good graces with my grandmother right now. But on the other hand, she was a curandera. And I think she learned that through indigenous roots. And she was not afraid to use that gift that she had been given for the betterment of people, to help people. And so a limpia was something that I call a ritual. So at the beginning of the year, we would all get a broom, like me and my 2 sisters, and my mother and her would arm themselves with certain prayers, with holy water and with sage. And we would start sweeping every room, under the bed, in the closet, in the corners, and we'd sweep. Before that, we had already raised all the windows in our home, and we had opened the doors. And then they would go in after us, and with the sage that was lit, and with holy water and with prayers. And we would go throughout the house doing that same ritual. And at the very end, we would sweep everything out the door. And basically, what we were doing was to rid our home of bad spirits, of demons, of illness, anything that had found their way into our home that was going to cause suffering and pain. And that was one of the ways that she protected us, that she tried to protect us. And so that would occur at the beginning of every year.
It is a ritual that afterwards you feel like you can let go of any negativity in that space.
Yes, yes. And it's something that, you know, that is one of the rituals that I think anybody can, you know, can do in their own homes. I do it, but I do it now by myself, you know. And it's more of a symbolic thing that I do. I mean, I'm not going to sweep the entire home, and, you know, but just that, you know, cleansing to start anew.
Start a new year, exactly.
Yeah.
I would love for us to look at some of these pictures.
Sure.
And then if you could just kind of like tell us a little bit about the pictures and maybe how they relate to the book, or anything that you feel like.
Okay. So, go
Yeah.
like this. So these are my biological parents. And of course, they're in the book. Okay. This is my aunt and my uncle that raised me and finished raising my siblings. My grandmother, Tere, is her mother. She was my father's mother, Teresa. But when my mother died, my father asked his sister and brother-in-law if they could come to our home to help take care of us until he came up with a better plan. They both, after my mother died at the age of 94, and she died in that same home that she came to as a relatively young bride. They never left us. And of course, that's me. Okay. They had a 5-year-old daughter, Yolanda, and that's me. And of course, I loved her as a sister, and I know she loved me as a sister too. Now, because my other siblings were older when my mother died, they always called my aunt and uncle, they called them tia and tío. I was the only one of the siblings that called them mom and dad, mama and papa. And then these are compadres, my padrinos, my tia and tío, and their family. And we were extremely close to them. They did well, and so they always made sure that they would try to cover the gaps in our lives. I love them dearly. So this is their family and my family. I have two brothers that are still living. One of them passed. And then I had a sister that passed away. And then I have my sister that's still alive. So there were 6 of us. But by the time my mother died, we had already lost the first girl. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
And of course, this is my first communion picture that is on the cover of the book.
Why? I did my. Why is Do you remember? Is there anything in the book about your first communion and that being special?
No, there were a lot of stories that didn't make it into the book for no rhyme or reason. I think what happened was when Josie said, "Send me what you have," I went ahead and I sent her what I had already edited, and that's what I gave her. And then when she got it all, she said, "That's enough. I have enough to work with, and we don't want the book to be too expensive." And so there are stories that didn't make it that when I look at them, I wish had been included. But I don't really go into my first communion memories.
I'm sorry to like talk about myself, but my first communion, I wore my aunt's the same dress she wore for her first communion.
Oh, how special!
Right?
Yeah,
Right? That
yeah.
was like all my grandparents were crying.
Yes.
Because I fit it like perfectly, and then I also look exactly like my tia. And so, anyways, that's just. What questions do I have? I have a couple other questions, but I'm trying to ask which one first. Is there a way that maybe we could get? No, I'm gonna ask my question first. Why is this important? These stories important for future generations. You kind of already touched on this as to giving people like a sense of identity, and you don't read these stories often. Anything else that you'd like to add about why this story is important?
I think we've been, as Mexican Americans, I think we have all received such an incredible gift of culture. And so much of it is being lost. And I'm hoping that people start reconnecting or embracing this beautiful culture that's there, that I can assure people that as they grow older, a lot of their memories are going to be cemented in that culture that they saw, that being celebrated. That was one of the reasons that I think I wrote. And also, I grew up in a part of town that was vilified, isolated, forgotten, and called off limits. You know, you don't go to the West Side. But there was such a different reality on the West Side. And I was hoping that people could see the West Side through my eyes and not just what flashes before them on TV at night. It was truly a interconnected community where people knew each other, they cared about one another, they stepped up for each other to see them through hard times. I wanted to capture that vibrancy of the West Side, the loudness, the color, the traditions that were being celebrated in that part of town. I wanted them to see neighbors that were hardworking, decent, respectful, because there was so much respect between men and women. Even though there were gangs on the West Side, they had certain rules. And one of them was, if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. If you respect yourself as a woman, we'll respect you as a woman and leave you alone. And so those were some of the rules that existed. And I just have always been proud of being a West Sider. I love the West Side, and I'm so blessed and happy to be able to share some of the stories coming out of the West Side. We've had a lot of people that have come out of the West Side that have done wonderful things, and I am very proud of each one of them.